balancing a clinical academic career, and I think I think this is a work in progress, and I think there are ongoing sort of challenges and joys that this type of role brings. My name's Jodie Eade. I'm an ITU nurse by background. I'm currently working as a postdoc researcher and lecturer at the University of Exeter, but I'm also still retained an honorary clinical academic contract with Oxford University Hospitals Trust. So this is just to give you sort of an overview of how sort of my career to date, and just sort of, as I say, some reflections about sort of trying to function in this type of role. I thought it was really useful every time that I was applying for any type of fellowship or funding from the NIHR. I always found it was really useful just to sort of see people's career pathways, because I think it's always really unique and always very different. And I always found that really sort of invaluable. So just to give you an idea of sort of my research pathway. So I qualified as an ITU nurse many years ago. I stayed in ITU. I did many different clinical roles, clinical governance, management, and then I decided to sort of branch out and try and do a little bit of research, having done my master's. So I started working at Oxford University as a research nurse, and that's really where that sort of gave me a springboard into research and getting NIHR funding. So I did do a preparatory research fellowship with our local BRC. That was amazing. During that time, I worked up an application to the clinical doctoral research fellowship program with the NIHR. So I was successful in doing that. And after I completed my doctorate, I was lucky enough to be appointed as a clinical academic nurse researcher in the Oxford ICU. And this is sort of where most of my reflections come from, actually, from that. I'm also currently on a Development Skills and Enhancement Award, which is an amazing award if anyone is interested in exploring and applying for that type of funding. But that really does give you a bit of protected time in a clinical academic role to develop your research portfolio. And it really is a development award, and it's about you as a researcher. So I think that those are sort of really useful funding streams that you could explore if you're sort of starting out as a clinical academic. So this is how I was sort of fitted into the structure within Oxford, and obviously this is going to be very different to everyone's context is very different. So in the Oxford Trust, we're lucky enough to have a really good kind of research infrastructure, and that was something that I drew really heavily on as part of my role as a clinical academic. So we actually have a director of research, nursing research. We have divisional leads for research, and I sort of sat below those corporate roles, and I was sort of the interface between the corporate role and the ICU service. And actually what I found as a clinical academic was that I had input into many of the different work streams within the ICU. So I was very much working with sort of the education team. I was working with the clinical governance team, really trying to get involved with improvement strategies at a local service level, as well as developing my kind of broader national sort of research portfolio. So that's how I sort of fitted in into the structure in Oxford. And I also worked alongside the senior management team within the critical care unit. So I really found that my clinical academic job spanned multiple elements of that service, and I think complemented those as well and brought a different element to those strands. So when I was asked to talk about this, it was really interesting that they phrased it as balancing a clinical academic career. And I think it really is about balancing different needs at different times. So for me, it was really about trying to balance my research agenda and making my research agenda visible, but balancing that with the needs of the organization, and also balancing my own motivation, so what I enjoy doing and what I got from doing research. So it really honestly is such a balancing act. And I think sometimes you're at certain points during your career, you're more weighted towards perhaps the organization, and then other times perhaps you're more weighted towards things that you want to do because you get personal fulfillment out of them. So it really is about balancing those sort of three interconnecting elements of a career. So in terms of the research, when I was starting out as a clinical academic, I was very much needing to have guidance and needing to have networks. So I'd come from a predominantly clinical background. And actually, what I've realized is that you really need to draw in expertise and create your network of people that can support you down a pathway that is potentially slightly unfamiliar. I was the only clinical academic within my specific ICU. So I had to explore opportunities throughout the organisation. I had to explore opportunities to connect with people that were functioning as clinical academics, not necessarily in my own organisation. And actually, what we really need support with is navigating that research process. So how do we apply for grants? What sort of local support have we got available? So on this slide, it's the RDS, but actually I've worked with Sophie now for, it's probably 7 years or so. So I went to it was the research design service at that point, but now the research support service. And I went to the research support service when I was preparing for my PhD. And actually, I've stayed connected to them throughout because they were a great source of knowledge, guidance, helping me apply for grants and applications that perhaps I didn't have immediate expertise on. So I think finding your people, finding people that will support you. Also, as a clinical academic, you need to develop yourself. So you need to have a bit of an idea about your own personal development strategy, because as I say, we're sort of still balancing two worlds, aren't we? We're still balancing that clinical care with that research. So actually, you really have to think about what it is that you need to fulfill both elements of that role. So having a bit of a personal development strategy I found really helpful. And actually, when I was applying for particular funds, so for the CDRF, for instance, I used that as an opportunity to identify gaps within my own personal development that actually I needed to be able to write about within that application. So I used that application as a way to kind of craft my own development plan as well, and realize where I had gaps. I had a really good supervision team, so this is absolutely fundamental to any sort of clinical academic career, and having the right people with the right expertise that actually have operated in similar situations to you. So obviously have had are working within the clinical academic sphere, understand the challenges and the opportunities that are there. So thinking about who you've got around you, who your supervision team are, and people that are familiar with that process. So obviously, prior to 2016, I'd never applied for any research funding. That was a completely unknown process to me. So having people that have trodden that path, are familiar with the sort of tricks and tips of applying as well, is really important. And this is about you consciously thinking about who you've got around you to help you with that. Things that I found that I really needed to kind of work on, having come from a predominantly clinical background. So I needed to think about courses that to sort of, in terms of supporting my research, the types of methods that I was going to use. So what courses and things did I need to do? I'm going to talk a little bit more about networks later on, and hopefully give you a few kind of pointers as to how you can craft those networks. I needed to find opportunities to apply for funding. So that might be as a co-applicant, that might be sort of small local kind of grass seed funding pots. Thinking of ways that I can expose myself to different ways of applying for funding. I had to understand how to use social media as well. And again, this was something that I'd not really done. So understanding how to promote myself, understanding how to make myself more visible nationally within my organisation as well. And that's something that I'll talk about as well a little bit later. Need to think about your research leadership. So how do I develop leadership as a clinical academic? And part of that is about capability and capacity within your local area. So helping to develop pathways for other clinicians and supporting those clinicians to develop a research profile. And also thinking about ways to kind of showcase the work that I was doing. So really a lot of a clinical academic career is about making sure that you're visible to the right people. And that's not being a narcissist. That's not because you want that kind of, oh, well done, you're doing such a good job. It's because you have to demonstrate worth and you have to demonstrate value for money because you are being employed as a clinical academic. So it is about showcasing and it's about creating opportunities for other people as well. So for me, I think what I really had to think about, and actually if you, as I say, I come from a nursing background, and I think this is probably similar for a lot of researchers. If you look at the really successful sort of, not just clinical academics, but researchers, they have a brand, they have something that they are really kind of heavily linked to. And I think for me, because obviously you're really excited and you want to do everything and the horizons are, you know, really broad, but actually you need to be a little bit strategic and think about, what is my brand? How am I going to be immediately recognized as a researcher in this sort of area? And I think perhaps in medicine that might be slightly clearer. I think in nursing it can be a little bit more challenging. So I did really think about, how can I make myself more visible and be associated with certain things. So I really sort of focused on, my PhD was mostly about patient safety and using human factors methods to explore and design safer healthcare systems. I'm obviously closely affiliated with ITU and patient deterioration pathways. So I think this is something that you may want to think about, and also it will help with your time management. So have sort of pillars of research that you think really contribute to your portfolio and your development of your brand, because actually you're going to be stretched, aren't you, because you're trying to fulfill, you're wearing two hats. So I think really building a brand is actually really important. So balancing the needs of the organization. So this was something that I worked really hard to do. So I found, as a clinical academic, I found ways that I could do work that was actually, again, heavily visible within the organization and demonstrated value to, and what what value I could bring to that organization. So, and these are just examples of things. So, for example, I helped design a part of our intensive care unit. So we did lots of work with staff, simulations, work process mapping, and that was alongside my PhD. But it was trying to demonstrate what I could do and what I could contribute to the organisation, and what perhaps might not be done had they not had a clinical academic in ITU at that time. So I did try and sort of help things and get involved with projects that actually there was no question about the sort of added value. So this is just again the sort of that project where we looked at the design and we asked staff to come and test that design of the ITU and the layout and and we mocked it up in one of our sort of joint halls that we have and on the sites, and we actually asked staff to come and move around and use that design as and evaluate that and try and get as much real world use of that design as we could. We also did some work where we were designing the bed space to complement the way nurses delivered intravenous drugs, because that was a high frequency task that people did, and we actually tried to design the new bed space so it complemented that process, just because it was a process that was done so frequently, and actually some slight design tweaks meant that that process could be more effective. So actually, as a clinical academic, I'm sort of balancing things that I find really interesting, but also things that I know will have a big impact on staff and the well-being of staff, and actual small design changes can have huge rewards. So I was bringing it from a real sort of clinically focused kind of efficiency point of view as well. When I started as in my clinical academic role, as I say, I was really conscious of the fact that I needed to demonstrate impact, and this is something that, as a clinician, as an ITU nurse, I didn't have to do. I knew that there was impact. I was accounted for in the outcomes of our patients. But as a clinical academic, you need to be able to demonstrate impact across the organisation. So I was really clear about how I audited my time, how I audited my the input that I had, the outputs, and what I deemed as impact. So I was really clear in how I what's the word, sort of audited, took notes of the work that I was doing, and I had evidence. So after my first year in post, I was able to bring all of this evidence out to say this is what's happened over the year. So I do think it's about demonstrating impact and having your mind sort of on the longer game of this is what I need to be able to demonstrate. And then balancing self. So we have obviously all gone into research, and we all love research. It is a passion for most of us. And actually, and I think that that's really important, because clinical academic job is unusual. It is tough. As I say, you are balancing lots of different things. And I think finding what it is that you love to do and holding on to that is really important. So for me, things that I found really important, that I really held as really valuable, was the fact that as a clinical academic, I could potentially provide opportunities for people that wouldn't necessarily have opportunities. So I was always looking for ways of how can I involve some of the staff within ICU within a research project? How can I invite staff to help develop a manuscript? How can we look at getting some small sort of pots of funding to help with quality improvement projects? So I was always trying to think about how I could bring people with me along my research journey, and that was something that I've always found a very positive experience. So when things are getting tough, you have to kind of focus on the things that you love to do. So the other things that I really liked was, and this isn't a huge project, this is not a sort of, a huge funded research project, but I knew that this was a quality improvement project that would really have an impact within the critical care. And this was the development of something called evidence-based rounds. And it was a quality improvement project. There is going to be a publication from this, but it's not a huge research project. But I knew that there was an opportunity. We could potentially create education opportunities for the clinical staff within the ICU at the time that they may not necessarily get access to. This is a way to kind of bring in the education team and give the education team a pilot model of education that they could explore and potentially integrate into their service provision. So as I say, this isn't an NIHR funded huge project, but this was something that I knew locally would have a lot of impact and would promote staff well-being, because we all know that the more that we're learning, the more opportunities we have to learn and develop, the better our staff feel. So I think this was things that I genuinely just had motivation to do, because they were important to me. And then I think this is something that I thought would be really useful to just briefly talk about. So I did mention about networks. As a clinical academic, you can feel that you're maybe not so much in medicine, and I may be speaking out of term. I think as a nursing clinical academic, you could potentially feel that you're working in silo a little bit. You're not quite fully in anyone's domain. I was really lucky, as I say, that we did have a good research infrastructure within Oxford, but I think networks and understanding your networks and who you've got available to you is so important when you're starting out. So this is just sort of a bit of a mapping exercise, and this is something that you could actually do. So what you want to do is have a really good balance of people that you can rely on. So you do want your experts, you want people that can help you and be that kind of senior member of your team, of the work that you're doing, to make sure that you're aligning with best evidence. You definitely want your experts. When you're starting out as a clinical academic, you want people that connect you. When I first started out, I was very Oxford focused because that was the only place that I'd ever worked. But actually, what I really needed was to broaden my networks and really understand opportunities and what other people were doing nationally. So I think you really need people that are well connected, that can connect you and understand where you may fit in different organisations, in different groups of research groups, for example. So understanding who your connectors are, you want people that are peers, so people that are going through the same thing as you, trying to balance a clinical academic career, understanding where the pitfalls are, where they've done things that perhaps they would do differently. So have peers, have people that are your rising stars, and that goes back to taking people with you. So who is it that you just get a lot of, that really build you up, really make you think, this person, I really want to support this person. I want to see them develop. I want to give them the opportunities that perhaps other people have given me. You may want some outliers as well, which I think is quite interesting. So you don't, and obviously this is about challenging the way that you work, the way that you think about things. So you want people that you don't want an echo chamber of people. So actually you want some people that are outliers. You want people that think differently, that use different methods to you. I mean, that's why I love human factors, because it draws on methods from so many different industries. And I think that's really helped me see that actually there are probably people doing things very differently and better than I am. So you want people to challenge you. And then I think the last thing for me is people that build you up. And I know that some people say actually that's not important. And I think this is where it's balancing yourself. For me, it is really important to work and network with people that make me feel good. I don't want to work with people that are potentially add problems to a group that I'm working with. I want to work with people that make me feel good, that actually I can see that there's value, and they don't necessarily have to agree, but it's having that fine balance. So I think working with people that you genuinely enjoy, that really give you, really give you a good insight into a good research career, I think that is really important. But very happy to have a debate about that if people have a different opinion. So just some quick reflections. I think for me, don't be afraid to ask. And that was something that I found quite difficult initially. But don't be, if people will want to help you, they will want you to be their rising star. So actually don't be afraid to ask for input. Obviously there's an etiquette in the way that you approach people, but yeah, don't be afraid to ask for people to get involved. Don't underestimate how much you need a team. I think, having come very much from a clinical background, and I'm still very much in that team mindset, I think working with a team is really important. Again, that's something that I find really helps from a kind of self-motivational point of view. I think work with people that you like and that build your confidence. I think that research can be such a difficult pathway to follow. Actually, make it slightly easier for yourself. Take people with you. I think that's another really important thing, because that will absolutely give you the kind of spark of joy that will maintain you through when things are slightly challenging, and continue to do some of the things that you love. You'll obviously need to balance getting those big grants, getting those huge multi-site studies, but equally there is value in doing perhaps some of the smaller things that you do love to do and that will have direct clinical or workforce benefits, and that they don't necessarily need to be multi-site. So I think continue to do some of the things that you do love to do. And it's also just to say that, the reason that you've got this far and the reason that you have kind of gone down this pathway is because there's things that you really enjoy and there's certain expertise that you bring to the research process, and that's why you're thinking of potentially a clinical academic career. And actually it's finding your brand and finding your niche. So what is it that you can bring that makes you slightly distinct, and actually that's about what motivates you, I think, on a personal level. So yeah, it's just to remember kind of why you went into research in the first place and what was the thing that sparked the joy in the first place, because it can become a bit of a machine,